Morning, Jen.
Hey, how you doing, Eric?
I'm all right. How about you?
Good, good.
Maybe I do see more boxes. It's hard to say. I'm trying to judge from what we saw last week of your packing progress.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's more boxes. Yeah, there's 40 boxes of books now,
Yeah, sure.
which is exactly. I got all but like four books into that.
All right.
So I'm
So you
gonna.
have four books to read between now and your arrival in
No,
California.
I'm just gonna throw them in one of the kitchen boxes. But I told I had to sort of guesstimate. So I emptied one bookshelf and then I sort of estimated
Yeah.
from there how many I was going to need. And I came pretty much right
Close.
out on the nose, aside from those four books.
I think we moved 20 something boxes of records to Chicago, and
Wow.
then between our various Chicago homes, it would be more now because we've added additional records from like my dad's collection, and of
Hmm.
course you buy crap.
Yep. Yep.
Books, I don't even know how I'd estimate our books at this point.
Yeah.
It'd be a nightmare.
Yeah. I lost my record collection on one of the moves. I think the South America move. But my parents have a record collection, and I'm thinking that once I move out there, I might go ahead and actually buy an old-fashioned analog
Yeah.
phonograph, and maybe even an old console stereo because I think you can.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I need to update our system. We have a okay system, but it's old and some crap doesn't work and it's placed badly. Anyway, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. Hey
Life
everybody.
has opportunities for improvement.
Oh, we had Mark, but
Yeah, we did have Mark.
he'll be back.
Hey, Chris.
Did I chase him away? Oh no, I better not. I chased him away, didn't I?
Yeah, yeah. He's like, who's that guy? I don't remember him. No, he's been
Put
he's
me
been
down.
watching. He's been watching, so he knows you. And I hear so.
You're
You're
muted, Chris.
muted, Chris.
Oh, Chris, you're muted. So John Mayo apparently was the culprit. It turns out for
You're no longer muted, Chris.
I think Mark was intimidated by the fact that he's been replaced by a younger, better looking bald guy with glasses.
oh,
No,
burn,
no, 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 no.
Bernie, burn, burn, burn. Yeah, yeah. Okay, now he'll be back.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Will,
and
how do you feel about Hawaii?
yeah.
I've never been. Is there something happening there? I have
Uh,
not checked the news yet this morning.
Mark
No, that's where Mark
spends
goes
a
in the
portion of the year
wintertime.
in Hawaii. He winters in Hawaii, I think.
I that's that there are two states that I've never been to, Hawaii and Alaska.
Wow. Oh, so you've been
And
to the contiguous 48.
I've done all contiguous 48.
Really?
Wow, that's
I
impressive.
did a lot of road trips. So I guess when I say I've been to, I have set foot in.
Or driven
Right.
through. Yeah. All right.
You have
I
visited
no, I,
Does that
at
include
least a
layovers?
rest stop in each state.
I,
Does that
I
include
actually did set foot in all
okay.
of them. So
Does that
not
include
just
airport layovers though? Because I used to count that.
yes, it does.
Okay. All right. I,
But I don't
I
think
haven't
it's
been to all 50, but I've been to a good share if you count layovers.
yeah. I had a whole period. I haven't owned a car in 20 years, but I had a period where I was real motorhead. I just loved long. I still love long driving.
I do too.
I mean, I will rent a car. Eric can tell you. Whenever I go to the Midwest, I try and rent a car in Chicago and then do a bunch of driving there.
Yeah.
But
But
but yeah,
didn't you used to have an older BMW cycle?
yes, that was the other thing was yeah, the motorcycles. Yeah, I didn't do super long trip. I drove from DC to Chicago a couple of times on that,
E.
maybe four or five times. Sort of between those. Um, and that was a long trip. And then I had this wonderful trip. The best one I ever had was on an earlier. I've had two of these BMWs, and again, I haven't had that for 20 plus years. But I drove from Bloomington, Indiana. I spent like a week doing sort of a camping on motorcycle thing. So I drove from Bloomington, Indiana, up through the west coast of Michigan, through to Traverse City, and then all the way up into the Upper Peninsula.
Oh,
Mm,
nice.
nice.
It was
That would be beautiful.
it was gorgeous. Yeah, it was just absolutely gorgeous. There was like when I'm sort of at the north shore of the Upper Peninsula on my way to, I don't know, Sault Ste. Marie or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
That
whatever.
northern the northern area of Lake Michigan there is just
Well, no,
right.
this is Superior. This is like Superior. I think it's like Superior. I
Well,
never came.
okay. If it when if
Yeah,
did you
I'm
go
on the
across the
north part of Union.
bridge?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which
Okay,
was
yeah.
scary as
Then
hell on a
as you're
plank.
heading west, you're first looking south at
Yeah,
Michigan, and then you
yeah,
reach then you reach
yeah. Then I
Superior.
went
Yep.
north to so,
Right. Yep.
but yeah, whatever they yeah. So anyway, but I'm like a beautiful August morning, which means it was like 45 degrees outside
Right.
that night. I'd been camping, right? And but it's beautiful sunshiny August morning. I'm on the north shore of the Upper Peninsula. So I guess Superior. I think
So
it's
that is
Superior.
Superior. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect day, flat, beautiful back road, but no the road is perfect, and it's just good going along the coast. And I see ahead of me this giant bird starting to like land and then come up and it's like it realized I think it was an eagle, a golden eagle or brown eagle or something like that.
Mhm.
Anyway, but it's like 100, 200 yards ahead of me, and I'm bombing along about 80 miles an hour, and hits the road, and then almost immediately starts flapping back up, and it's got a snake
Mm. Wow.
that is sunning itself on the road. And I'm going, oh my God, this eagle just took a snake. And then I also realized, okay, he's not getting up very fast. And I'm like, oh my, I had to, I felt like I had to duck. Otherwise I was going to get a helmet full of snake and
Wow.
bird. But that was one of the most amazing situations. That was cool.
Yeah.
I
So,
was
That's kind of
that was
mythological, even.
yeah.
it was
Well, it is
amazing.
actually that is pretty classically mythological, isn't it? An eagle and the snake.
Yeah.
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 For some culture. Have you watched? Then this came up, and Ann and I are thinking about dipping into it. I think it's like Long Way Round, the series, like Ewan
I've seen a
McGregor.
Oh
couple of
yeah,
them.
yeah. I've got one or two of those. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I was in Glasgow. They've got this amazing transportation museum. So I visited Glasgow like 10 years ago, maybe 12, something like that. Scotland in general. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there's this amazing transportation museum in Glasgow, and they have the long way around motorcycles.
Okay.
Right. That's
And
Ewan
so
McGregor, right?
Yeah.
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 and some famous directors, some John Borman's son,
Yeah.
the guy who so I chased Grabe away. Somebody should email Grabe and say, I'll be nice. I think he chased him away. I think I did. I'm
Unless he's having yeah,
Technical. Yeah, he was. Well, he's
technical or household issues, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. He tries. When I didn't. Did you notice his background? Sometimes he said he was going to be at like
Like family.
grandkids sports games, so he'd be
Yeah.
watching on his iPad or something. So that may have given him connection issues.
I honestly no, I worry. We were having because the last meeting that we were all on, I had some stuff to say about he made a very thoughtful question about when you're actually talking about this is over the Pinker thing. And he has some very thoughtful question when in his practice, how does he actually talk about socioeconomic issues that resolve education. And I think I may have, yeah, I worry.
Yeah.
Like you
I
bulldozed
suspect
him?
not.
I don't think so. We've disagreed on things in the past.
I wasn't any disagreement here. I was just trying to, I was just there was a specific guy. So there's this famous case of this. There's this guy who like got hired by a British university who was very much into finding excuses, finding every way he can to justify ethnic, bell curvy stuff.
Mm.
Um, this guy, yeah, he sucks. It's like, just you look at I think it was in the chat. It was like look at the not the forward. What's the abstract? Look at the abstract of his thing. And it's like, yeah, why are people being mean to me for saying that it's people shouldn't be mean to me for saying that there's racial differences in intelligence,
Mhm. Yeah.
which is not the same as okay, you can actually look at yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's hard to yeah. It's yeah. That's a hard thing it's a hard topic to talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So how do we like Herbert Hoover so far?
uh,
As a person,
Yeah.
I only got to chapter. I finished chapter 2.
so he gets
Much more interesting.
yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And came to like him. I was like, how would I put this? I felt sympathetic to him as a youth, but
Mhm.
not someone I'd like.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Uh, as he moves into adulthood, I mean, I'm at chapter, I don't know where I'm at, 5, I think. So not fully to where we intended to get to. So
Mhm.
he's back from China,
Yeah.
and the China escapade makes me kind of not like him, but also understand him as a piece of the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I was and I've almost finished chapter 6. And and I'm interested. I didn't really, and I think I will, look into this author a little bit and kind of because
To
I think
understand
that
their
he's giving them a
position.
lot of breaks. At the end of chapter 5, or maybe somewhere in the early, the first half of chapter 6, he says something about how horrendous Hoover's behavior was in China, but yet, he said, it was, given how bad the Russians and the
Well, yeah,
Japanese
this is
were
this
and
is what I
all of
got
that,
to as well.
that
I mean, he's sort of saying this was the colonialist move into China.
right,
He was acting as part of that, and maybe he was better because he tried to give legal cover to it, which is a little weak sauce,
yeah,
but better than just control by the gun,
yeah,
which he then writes about. Hoover
yeah,
does.
right,
Yeah, so he's an interesting conflicted guy.
yeah,
I spent a few minutes over the week and watched a few interviews of the author.
Oh yeah.
He is a Canadian publisher by trade,
hmm.
and I think has been an editor of a couple of magazines, including a fairly large one.
So publisher,
Um,
like executive at a publishing house?
yes.
Okay.
So and I think he's written one other book, but he really is not a historian. He just happens to have read a lot about and
Hmm.
done research and written a book about Hoover
Right.
rather than, hey, I'm a historian and I wanted to delve into this for reasons. And
Yeah.
I think he said somewhere he was going to write a book about something else, but then kind of got fascinated by Hoover and so wrote this instead.
Mm.
Um,
Huh. Was he
and I,
intending to write about the Depression, do you think? Or
um,
because in his prologue, he sort of tries to differentiate what he's doing with this book from books that
Hoover
focus on
of the
Hoover and
Depression.
the
yeah.
Depression.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he
Yeah.
did specifically say too he was, and some of it may have been the economics of going into the Depression, how we dealt with it in the Hoover years, and then what happened in the
The Roosevelt years.
FDR. So Hoover had an idea of, hey, let's do this, and was starting to bring things out of the Depression.
Hmm.
Then he lost the election, and FDR actually came in and made things worse again before they then bounced back after. Um, and at one of the interviews I saw, I think was at an FDR institution, and they made big hay of the fact that, oh, we're going to bring this Hoover guy in to talk about
No.
something, we're all hagiographists about FDR, and we
Hmm.
hate Hoover,
Hmm.
but let's talk about Hoover and be warm and gracious while we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
thought it was interesting in the preface. I mean, to go back to that, that I didn't realize that he actually, after he was president, he had important roles in, all of these subsequent administrations all the way down to Nixon. So that was kind of interesting as well. The yeah the and the idea that Roosevelt was kind of his bête noire, and so I think that it is an interesting challenge to write this book that's about more than just, sort of the bonus army incident and the reaction to the to the Depression and, all of that associationalists, pulling up by our own bootstraps, kind of BS. But then in the penultimate paragraph, he does say the fact that he was bounced from office in 1933 with the economy in pieces at his feet and 1 in 4 Americans unemployed. This inglorious political feat is at the pinnacle of his career is a fact, one it took him many years to absorb, and one from which he never entirely recovered. But the stuff that's happening before then, I think, is going to be equally interesting. And he plants the seed of that, coming right off of that preface. I think he plants the seed when he begins talking about West Branch, Iowa.
Mhm.
He's, of this, what later, he called, kind of associationalism. These pioneer virtues of enterprise, fortitude, and self-reliance were preached in equal measure with collective responsibility. So that I can imagine, as I read that, I highlighted that because this is going to go a long way toward explaining or excusing his reaction to the Great Depression.
I mean, go ahead.
I was struck too by the number of not only the number of other presidents he worked with, and I think it was it's not in this section, but I think I flipped through the photos is probably where I saw it. He had an offer to work for JFK, but declined, I think, because he was getting into older age and, you know, didn't want to. And I think the photo was of he and then, junior JFK working in early politics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I've recalled too, and the thing I want to look out for in this is in one of the interviews, the author described him as an early progenitor of all of the forms of politics we see now. He was an early progressive, but while at the same time also an early, founder of the conservative movement.
Right, right. Before those things kind of congealed into the
or
configurations
or
that we're
solidified
living
in
with
like
today.
opposing spheres of, hey,
Right.
this is how it works.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that he worked for presidents kind of on both sides of the line, and
Mm-hmm.
it's, hey, we just want America to do well
Mm-hmm.
as a thing, and even more so from a guy who's spent time in Australia, another rising kind of Western power at the time, and then time in China.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I think that's the interesting thing I'll get out of the book, or hope to get out of the book in the later pieces, is how he kind of holds these two philosophies at the same time, and maybe ideas of where did that go wrong in later history.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Also the relentless self-promotion, really early on in his career, I thought was really
Well,
kind of interesting. I mean,
it
it's almost like it's almost like he's chasing clicks, to put it in
so
contemporary.
but it's and
so sorry.
even outside that though, it's so very American to be kind of like the cowboy explorer, confabulate who you are, how much you're making, what your position is in life.
Mm-hmm.
Because he describes him several times as saying a salary is higher. He's inflating his position. He's inflated his age by almost a decade, so he
Oh,
seems
right.
older and
To go
more
to Australia for the
responsible.
first time.
Well,
Yeah.
because
And
he had to, right? Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to me, that just screams like, oh, how American
Right.
to
Sure.
do all
Well,
these
but
things.
so there's two things that occurred to me about that. And Chris, right? One is that it's a turn from when he was young, right? The author makes a big deal of when he's in his first job. He's a striver. He's a quiet striver. He's the guy who gets everything, keeps the wheels turning and oiled and greased, and is making side bets or side gigs or whatever the whole way through. But
Mm-hmm.
he's not promoting himself. And then as soon as he goes to Stanford, the first student maybe at Stanford, which I didn't.
The first. Yeah.
I,
That was an odd little detail.
yeah.
Yep.
Um, then he starts becoming the self-promoter. But what I always wonder about particularly with journalistic elements of the time, is how much of that is Hoover promoting himself and how much of that is gilding in the story. Um, and it's just a, and where I come to that is it's often, I don't know if anyone else watches Finding Your Roots, Henry Louis Gates's show, which I quite
Mhm.
enjoy, but they always go back to these obituaries, which are very glowing about the ancestor, but they're
Mhm.
an obituary. And so I'm trying to struggle with that tension of, is this journalism? Is this like, uh, the company I worked for, we did a promo piece on Al Haig had an interview show about
Oh,
technology.
really?
Yes,
Wow.
about technology. And you can, and I don't know, but you basically write your questions and answers, right? So
Yeah.
how much of this was that, right? And or how much of it, or how, which is Chris's point,
Yeah.
or how much of it is the journalist rushed at deadline and getting facts wrong and trying to make a better story for a buddy of his or something.
Yeah,
Well,
there was at least one section in chapter 3 where he mentions, Hoover comes up with this or says he has an association with someone, and the author here
Oh,
specifically says,
yes, right.
I'm not sure if it was Hoover said this and or let the confabulation,
Intimated. Yeah.
well,
go, or
Right.
if the journalist put it in because he had a misunderstanding. So there's,
no.
I mean,
Yeah.
at least there's
Yes,
some.
he
Right. But
does
this is
make
sort of like
he
a
does make
primary
a
sources question to me.
yeah.
Primary or
He,
secondary, I guess.
he does make a point though also in, and again I'm just about starting the third chapter, but the first two they do make a real point of talking about his various family members, people who knew him when he was young, thinking, yeah, he wasn't much of anything.
He was kind of
This guy
dull.
is
Yeah.
not. In his childhood, people would largely say, oh yeah, well, we didn't. Yeah, and his college classmates were like, yeah, everybody was. This was the manager of stuff, but
Right.
so so I'm not getting the. I
Oh,
mean, I
yeah.
wouldn't call this hagiography by any means.
Yeah. Well, and
It's a,
and there's a moment, to go back to that self-promotion question. There's a moment when he is in charge of one of his, I think his first job, right? He's in charge of placing advertising with a national distribution of newspapers. So he's, and that I think the author could have dug into that more and and talked a little bit, and maybe explored a little bit whether this is the time when he sort of he learns the value of the press release, and kind of makes that a part of his self-marketing for the rest of his career. One of the other things that really struck me was how early all of this is. Yeah, first dorm assignment in Stanford history, so that he can claim to be the first student. And then Bert is among the first Americans to make the cross-country trip by rail to Oregon, the route having been opened a little more than a year before when he first goes out to the Willamette Valley. All of this stuff is happening, really. I mean, this is still the 19th century, for crying out loud. So this is all. I mean, a lot of his career is just so early, and so there he is.
And he starts working at a super. I mean, again, he's working,
He's breaking ground. Yeah,
but he's working for himself. I mean, also early just in his life. I mean,
yeah,
he's in business at basically at 15,
yeah.
14. I
Well, and
mean,
he's
doing
and
the
he even when he enters the mining business, he's like entering the business as, I mean, Hearst is not that far away in time. I mean, right, may even have still. I don't know when William Randolph, not William Randolph, the other guy, his father, um, George, was his first name George, I think, died. But they almost overlapped if they didn't actually overlap. So that there's a whole lot. And then the idea that engineering as a profession is new, kind of struck me as really interesting. And then his whole in the end of chapter 5 or the beginning of chapter 6, when he's trying to get their Lou's author friend to write a romance about about an engineer, or a play, and he thinks that this is going to be, this is going to just explain to the world who this new intellectual is. I mean, it was like Ayn Rand, wasn't it? I mean, it's just like holy shit.
But
For I mean, she had a book called For the New Intellectual. It says all of that. And the idea that this was how this is a new society, right? This new American industrial society, and that these are the new people, and that this is the virtue that they're kind of bringing.
well,
Uh,
it's sort of like a Horatio Alger
yeah.
bit also. But we also see parallels. I mean, maybe it's a little glib, but today, right, in a lot of the popular press or
Oh
the
yeah, with the tech bros.
tech
Yeah.
writers, right,
Yeah.
or
Yep.
the tech CEO writers slash ghost writers.
Right. Right.
or even to that, there's a little bit of, I mean, when I see him being, I think a lot of sort of right place, right time, you know,
Hmm.
and I think there's a parallel there
Yeah.
with now. I mean, so many of the tech bazillionaires or whatever, or
Yeah.
hell, I'm
Oh,
no bazillionaire, but me, or what, they're being able to make a career in this newfangled thing, the web, is very similar, and make a huge thing. Is I think sort of similar in its own way to being able to make a career and a fortune in this newfangled thing, engineering.
well, and when he moves his business after he breaks with the British firm that he's working for, and then he goes down to his new address at number 1 London Wall, and they are sort of they're in the business of sort of evaluating, and because they have this access to capital, right? They're it's this kind of wild west. You can we're gonna look at 100. I mean, it's almost like kind of sort of the VC or private equity world now, right? Where there's all of these opportunities out there, and because you're in the catbird seat, you can basically, I mean, it's not even almost like placing bets. It's like by finding, it's almost like, by finding the winners, you're basically just going to, yeah, maybe you're going to provide them a little bit of assistance, you know, financing, but you're going to ride them to huge profits. I mean, and that's almost, I mean, there's kind of a predatory element to that, and a kind of
Well, there's
kind of a, kind of a sinister aspect of capitalism, where it's not really about building. It's about
extracting,
extracting. Yeah,
which for a miner
yeah,
or a guy in mining,
right.
but
It's the
that's the
meta
question though
version
is,
of mining. Yeah.
I think let's say if you go into, if you want to become a tech bro and you just got out of college now, this business has been going on for decades, and with the Travis Kalanick's of the world and the Elon Musks, if you want to be like them, you've got to know here's what they've done, and this is how society sees them to go into it. And that's a much more questionable thing versus how much of that history would Hoover have been exposed to? Hey, if I go do this thing, I'm participating in X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
Or is he a kind of a pioneer at the front end of this space and it wasn't a conscious decision, hey, I'm gonna go screw people so I can make my own wealth? And or how much of it was luck that he happened to actually go work for a mining company that was actually sitting on, I think they said there were like three active mines that made most of the money.
Yeah.
And he seemed to be at least at one that had found a seam of something that they were making money off of. Um, so how much of that was luck? But then the other quirky thing too is, given his youth and his upbringing, and he's slowly moving west.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the parents, he doesn't have the stable childhood. You're tethered to within, at the time, probably most people didn't move more than 20 miles from where they grew up.
Right.
And here he is going to both Australia and then to China. So that, to me, that's kind of a quirky piece. I wish that they had been able to explore a little more is how the hows and whys, or
Yeah.
even how much, they mention that it's a risk of like 1 in 10 that you get sick going to Australia and that you die from, diseases.
Right.
How well versed would he have been to know I'm really taking a chance to go do this, or was
Mhm.
it just here's an opportunity, here's a job, I'm going to take it
Right.
and go do this thing.
Right.
And, whatever be damned, I don't have friends or family or I don't know anybody in this place.
Yeah.
I'm just going to try this out.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think those kind of pieces for me are missing in the story of there's a lot going on and he's describing, for what they say, hey, we don't have enough letters to, or I wish there were more letters. There's still a lot of description of
Hmm.
who he is and what he's doing at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious to like delve into one or two of those letters to see,
Hmm.
just how much is actually there versus what the author is rewriting
Yeah.
Do, do,
as a
do,
précis
do,
for us.
do you feel like he is like the author? Because something I really got again from the beginning was that he was talking about. I feel like sort of part of the what the author's attempting to do here is to sort of show Hoover as almost sort of an avatar for the times he's in. Like because he's at the beginning of this movement, the beginning of that movement. He's doing all these things, and again, and I'm sort of seeing that somewhat. Again, I'm only in the first. I've only finished the first two chapters, but I am seeing that he is he's representative of something really happening there. And as you've gone further along, do you feel like we're getting that representation, less about his personal foibles, but more sort of what he's what's happening, what was happening in the times, and yeah. So yeah, do you feel like that's happening? Um,
Yeah. Well, to contextualize it with I just looked up a couple of dates in mining history. All right. So George Hurst, I asked about George Hurst earlier and I just looked him up. He died in 1891. So their lives overlapped. It was 1897 when Hoover goes to Australia. Anaconda Copper in Butte, Montana, was worked by the Anaconda Gold and Silver Mining Company from 1881 to 1891. So, and that was a huge success. It was later turned into the Amalgamated Copper Company in 1899, and then into Anaconda Copper in 1915. And then they went off to Chile and started this big wave of American mining imperialism. But also, I mean, but Chile had already been doing a lot of really high end copper production. The copper smelting company Urmeneta y Errázuriz in Chile really kind of got going in 1844 and was operating through the 1860s and 70s. And in 1878, the value of their exports was almost $32 million, or what at the time would have been about almost 6 million pounds sterling. So huge, a huge and Urmeneta actually in Chile, although he was described by the locals, by the Chilean people as El Loco de Burro, because he used to spend his time kind of wandering around the desert on an ass. He was actually prospecting, and he was actually this really, really scientific miner who had done undergraduate science and kind of mineralogy work at Brown University in Rhode Island, and then had gone back and had made the biggest fortune at the mines of places like Tamaya. So this is already kind of really well established by the time he gets into it. So I'm kind of curious whether he sort of represents like a second phase of this, which is really kind of more marked by a sort of bureaucratization of mining business. all
Oh,
in
wow.
his, sort of all in his, because his book that he writes, is about all of these, not only details of, kind of metallurgy and how to, dig shafts and, all of that kind of nuts and bolts, in the mine stuff, but also, kind of running the business and managing the finances and all of that.
Well, he does kind of. London seems to be the financier of a big chunk of all this too. So
Hmm.
it's the London colonialization piece, but it's also then, and as I recall too, some of the US, going back, a book or two to American Empire,
Hmm.
you know, where America is pushing people or nudging people to go in terms of our overseas exploits or early exploits, which this seems to be kind of part and parcel to that time period.
Hmm.
And even more fascinating when you think of a future president in the 30s who will oversee that empire after, between the two world wars. Here's a guy who went out and actually went to Australia, went to China.
Hmm.
He's not going to island nations, but at least it is a part and parcel of that kind of
Well,
broader
I mean,
empire building. But I feel like there's a different kind of cowboyishness to how he's described to going to Australia versus if this had been somebody from London doing that same thing.
Hmm. Well,
well,
and there's a parallel. I mean, so maybe so the story is also sort of partly about the transition from Great Britain being kind of the center of all of this, right? Because because in the story of the Morgans, right, Junius Morgan is a London banker. He works in the city. He makes his fortune in the city of London, right? J.P. Morgan's father, and then he sort of helps establish, John Pierpont Morgan in New York City, and that, and it's during really well, it's during J.P. Morgan and J.P. Morgan Jr.'s lives that the transition happens from the city of London to New York City, as the center, partly with the help of the J.P. Morgan Company. But there is that, and the Brits are also heavily invested in Chilean mining and Chilean nitrates, and the whole War of the Pacific in 1878 is all about, the Germans and the British kind of, having it's almost like a proxy war,
Yeah.
of these European powers in the Atacama Desert. So,
Well, and this I think does for the events around it, this book does a pretty good job of contextualizing the boxer
mhm,
period
mhm,
because it relates directly to who he is and where he's at.
yeah.
But I kind of wish it would add a little bit of contextualization of otherworldly events that are going on around his youth and growing up as they may impact him and the US and broader history going on later. So some of these little contextual things we're talking about that just aren't in the book would be kind of fascinating little tidbits to like, although, then it
Yeah.
One
doubles the size of the book to do that, but
one specific one that I think, given his, later on, he like, he's a pretty big racist later on, and or that comes up is, he's at Stanford, where, which was sort of the hotbed of the eugenics movement.
Mhm.
That's that at the beginning, so yeah, he doesn't even that doesn't even get mentioned now. Obviously, he's in engineering and probably doesn't have that much interaction with the biologic, the biologists and the like, who are
It's a small campus at the time.
small campus, and there's only, but it was really sort of it was a foundational place for eugenics.
Mhm.
Mostly, and again, the main reason I know this is because all those guys came from Indiana University, where Eric and I grew up. So where they just renamed half the, they renamed half the buildings because they were named after these guys who then went on to Stanford
and be eugenicists.
Yeah.
and be eugenicists.
Right.
Yes.
Right. One of the other things that I thought was kind of, although he mentions McKinley once, that it could have been more fleshed out is maybe it will be in a later section, right? Is this sort of political trajectory from McKinley to Teddy Roosevelt, because Hoover is ultimately going to be a Republican in office, after after a decades-long string of Republicans in office, all of them working
For
for
progressive.
Andrew Mellon, really, as Secretary of the Treasury.
Republicans were progressives at that time.
Yeah. Well, and especially after Teddy Roosevelt, kind of brought that in his single term, and it wasn't until, so then Woodrow Wilson kind of hijacked it, right, and called himself a progressive, but really wasn't. But then you've got, and then after Wilson, you get this unbroken string once again of all of these Harding and Coolidge and Hoover, and Harding and Coolidge at least, are really under the thumb of Andrew Mellon. So there's a kind of an interesting story of, because, and also I think the author, I think Whyte, is sort of underplaying. He mentions it from time to time. Like he says at one point, he says he also monkeyed with numbers in his monthly reports and press releases for Buick Mooring to exaggerate the already stellar performance of his mines. So he's playing, he's playing the game. And then later that gets in the negotiation with Chiang during the Boxer Rebellion, right? There's another episode where Whyte is leaving it up to the reader to decide whether I felt that he was leaving it up to me to decide whether or not I believe that Hoover was really disingenuous when he was negotiating with Chiang, and then the powers back in London, and especially Mooring himself, kind of didn't honor the face-to-face agreements that he had made, or whether that was all, that whether Hoover himself was BSing him and saying behind the scenes that, that if we don't control this 100%, and if I personally don't control this 100%, then the game isn't worth the candle.
Yeah. Well, that also calls into question too, I'm lying in my reports back to headquarters, who are actively using that information to sell stocks and make even more money in the speculative markets than
Right.
they may potentially ever be making in actual real gold out of the ground as
Mm-hmm.
a mining operation, which in some sense makes this whole thing a Ponzi scheme with a central seed, which is also kind of an American,
Yeah.
it, obviously Ponzi operated, where he has an Italian background with that last name, but it's an American thing to do this.
Yep.
And then the Whyte does not seem to tie that kind of making up of these documents to Hoover's, hey, I should be paid more money. I'm doing more for this operation. They won't succeed without me.
Mm-hmm.
But that also is a really kind of dirty, caustic Americanization of this is how American business and capitalism ought to run. And then he becomes president later on,
Mm-hmm.
which is just, an odd thing, particularly given his religious early upbringing, and which is not mentioned at all in the section about business or being in the outback.
Mm-hmm.
Other than I think
It,
one small mention of, one of
it,
his family members moving to Whittier.
yeah, it's mentioned. I think it's mentioned well, I read it as mentioned in passing
Yeah.
in one place from his upbringing where it says he's taking after his father as a striver and the outlier of the Quaker, because he was a small businessman and he was doing
Mm-hmm.
the smelting
Right.
and everything.
Yeah.
I was thinking about uh, the conversion of the Chinese mine as less Ponzi and more private equity, where they gave Chang whatever it was, 20 or 37%. They held the other 67 or 63% and then loaded 500,000 in debt onto the company.
Hmm. Yeah, it was almost like a leveraged buyout.
It was a lever. It was effectively a leveraged buyout with more dodgy paperwork than usual. It felt
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and we've lost Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. So and actually, yeah, his partnership and his 20% stake in all of the profits that he then, sort of mistimes cashing
Right.
out of it, right? It struck me as a kind of an interesting parallel with, stock options and things in the
Yeah.
present. And then this guy that absconded, this guy Rowe, right, who absconds and this accountant, and then is caught in Toronto and
I haven't gotten there yet. Okay.
or he's caught in Toronto. He's hauled back to London, where he's imprisoned for 10 years. And Hoover supports his family. It says,
Which is
White says
yeah.
he sent checks from time to time to help support the Rowe children who were being raised by their aunt.
Which touches back on Mark's comment in the chat about, and I know he's left, so
Well, I
uh,
think he was in a moving car, so he probably
exactly.
lost his contact.
That he's driving his employees, and yet then he's also supporting all these people
Hmm.
back at Stanford and family and this apparently this accountant. So this dichotomy of personality is intriguing.
Right, which struck me as
The
kind of
like the just business versus a Quaker or a friend's life
it
almost.
struck me as it could be read as, oh, he's sort of a Steve Jobsy guy. Or it could also, I mean, an alternate reading of that would be that, that he was actually implicated in, whatever this chicanery was, and
Oh,
Rose the
right. So
guy,
he had
and
to
Rose the guy who took the fall for it.
keep him on
So he
side. Yeah.
he's he yeah, keep him on side, and and feeling a little responsible or guilty about the destitute children, because Mrs. Rowe apparently also disappeared from the scene. So
but he's obviously gonna have some real sympathy for abandoned children.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, what I got from he does have this history of people who he personally knows and cares about.
Mhm.
He will
Yes.
be, he supported his teacher forever, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Which does strike me as
the
hard to argue against. Yeah.
the first example I think too was the 72-year-old employee, if I remember the chronology right, that he fires from the company and the guy says, "How am I going to support my wife?" And then he gives him, I think it was $300 to go away, which is probably more than the guy would have made in, years of working. So he fires him off the corporate payroll, and then it's not clear whether it's 300 out of his own pocket or $300 out of the company's pocket
Mhm.
is the parting gift. But it's kind of like, and it's a weird American thing that we seem to, toxic capitalism, which is way worse now than it would have been then, but
Mhm.
like clear things off the books for the corporation to make money, but then allow private organizations and philanthropy to support the thing that the company probably ought to have supported and dealt with
Yep.
itself.
Yep.
So
I'll
leave the
fight for
guy
it.
on the books and pay him the smaller salary over time, and then, what happens, happens. But
Mhm.
instead, here it's almost an early microcosm of save the money for the corporation and then let somebody else foot the bill.
Mhm.
And I've because it's tax time and people are filing taxes and corporations have to report these things, the number of like multi-billion-dollar making companies who are paying $0 in taxes but making huge profits and giving windfalls to CEOs in the last like week and a half is every day I turn around and see, oh, this company is doing incredibly well but pays nothing in taxes.
Mhm.
And then, but then maybe the CEOs are like donating whatever to help support X, Y, and Z. And it's like,
That's actually, I think there's a real cultural difference here. I mean, again, we get back to Carnegie and everything, that the CEOs of today are much happier to um, uh, the federal, let the government handle charity,
Hmm.
as it were, versus doing personal charity. The John D. Rockefeller was a horrible human being in certain ways, but he actually literally tithed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Uh, of
and Andrew Carnegie,
course, yeah,
to his credit, said that the man who dies rich dies disgraced,
right.
and yeah,
So
but
refuse, and
go ahead.
and we have people today. I mean, you mentioned Steve Jobs before. Steve Jobs' personal contributions to charity were, I think, basically nil, and even he sort of famously, largely, did his best to. He didn't quite disinherit his daughter,
Yeah.
and
Close, yeah.
his
Well,
ex-wife.
there's a theory. There's a theory about that, though.
I,
I've heard a theory about Jobs that says that he's the, and it was in one of those books that we read, wasn't it? Wasn't it when was it Pink? It was somebody was talking about Maimonides, right? And the and
yeah,
these
that was
and
Pinker.
those levels of
But I
goodness.
don't think there's a big secret as to, I mean, what actually happened to Jobs's money is not a secret.
Yeah.
He didn't give away much of it.
Right.
And that was a very different,
But
again, and again, there's a very different approach to charity now for the ultra rich than there was
Right.
around the Hoover.
Well,
so
and
And
Carnegie's point was in the Gospel of Wealth, which Chris linked in the chat, was that it was almost he thought of his retained profits going to public projects as kind of a forced savings for the workers. And his argument was, well, if I paid it out in wages, then half of those wages would end up in the taverns and brothels of
journalism.
Pittsburgh, and so or Homestead itself, and which I drove through when I was out in Pittsburgh, and Homestead is a hell of a weird place. But in any
and
case, that's neither here nor there. But his point was that he was that this good that he was doing with this fortune that he had accumulated would have been, and it's a self-serving argument, of course, would have been
Hugely.
less possible had he paid a higher wage to the people, and they would have had their own choice about how to spend it. So in a way, the argument is, well, I'm depriving my workers now so that I can provide this public largesse later, which is bullshit.
yeah,
But also there's an element of truth in it.
But even now you want to sideline those government goods. So let's say you donate, lots of money and you get a whole system of libraries all across the country. Well, now the local governments can need to continue to support those libraries to keep them going. But if you harm them and underfund them, then corporations can come along. And in some sense, we're seeing this now as local governments are paying huge amounts of money to streaming services like Libby and Hoopla to provide these things to subscriptions to people through local libraries.
Mhm.
And so you hamstring the governmental service, which then means a corporation can come in and take all the money, where it's easier for them to do that rather than actually. So that whole thing now seems to have come around full circle in a whole nother way.
Well,
Money is power. Money
yeah,
is power.
the only thing I agree with you, Chris. The only thing that I sort of feel a little bit uneasy about as you're saying that is when you say government, because I think at least in this era,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot, the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot of move towards, like Albert Todd, the guy that I studied in Kalamazoo, the peppermint guy. He was kind of he was a monopolist, but he was also kind of a socialist, and he was the founding president of the Municipal Ownership League, and so and they wanted to to take private for-profit enterprises like gasworks and streetcar lines and things like that, and bring them into, and have the, have not the federal government, not big government, but have municipalities, kind of take them on by eminent domain or in whatever way,
Yeah.
and then run them, in the public interest. But that's kind of that's government, sort of collective action for social good at a different scale from the way that I think we imagine it nowadays, which I think
Oh yeah.
tends much more to, to becoming something that you need to, to build something like Doge to root out the, all of the
Yeah.
graft and grift and corruption in it.
Well, that's the other thing too, is the closer you get to the individual. So in Hoover's case, it's the people he knows that he's supporting with his largesse. He either knows them specifically, or in the case of supporting, the orphaned kids,
Mhm.
I I experience that. I don't want others, so
Right.
I know them, or I have a relationship with them, even though their dad screwed me.
Yep.
I'll support them. Um, and the closer you are to knowing the person, let's say the greater the level of, is a shorthand, the greater the level of communism,
Right,
small
right, in the
c,
graver sense, yeah.
in the
Yep.
graver sense,
Yep.
that you're willing to support them.
Mhm.
And as you go up, the local governments, because they are of the people specifically, tend to be a little better at that. And I'm kind of curious what smaller local governments looked like at this time versus how we view them now. And then the higher up you go into places like the federal government, then we have to worry about welfare queens because, oh dear, like we can't do that. Or, when you mentioned like, oh, I don't want, I'll give my money to the do good institutions rather than give it to the workers who will just spend it on, liquor and women. The modern version of that is, oh, we don't want to give, we don't want to give black women money because they'll go spend it on, fingernails.
Right.
Oh dear, clutch our pearls.
There is an early, and there's a specific date that's important, and that is, am I right that it's 1912 that we get the federal income tax?
I think it gets implemented in 13, yeah. Yep.
But
So
yeah, we
passed
had
in
to have an
12.
actual constitutional amendment to
Mhm.
have, I mean, the federal government was basically run mostly on taxes and import duties. There was no, there was no, so it was basically starved. There was
That's
very,
why the
very,
tariff was such a huge deal, yeah.
yeah. But basically, they made money on mostly booze import pricing, booze import taxes, I think, up until then. So there wasn't really a big question of, oh, the federal government wasn't taking anything. The federal government hardly had anything.
It wasn't doing
So
much of anything.
yeah, it wasn't doing much of anything. It was except for providing a
Well, and
non-state
Teddy
army.
Roosevelt was building a deep water navy and yeah, a couple of things like that. Yeah.
So you back to your point though, you had yeah, I mean politics really was much more local because the income streams were much more local. I mean, you do see all these, particularly sort of in more established in the Midwest and the East and whatever, all these public works, public goods, mostly happened in all these things from the turn of the century. They were built locally, the big parks and stuff, and civic buildings and the like. That was the thing.
Mhm.
So again, very local. And what was the deal? What was there was one of the many arguments that J.D. Vance had with the Pope recently was trying to claim that the love, you love your neighbor first, and eventually you love the people out in the world. And of course, the Pope is pointing at, no, that's not kind of how Christ works.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Right.
but it
Right.
goes back to what you're talking about. Of yes, obviously, it is easiest to love the people near you and to
Yeah.
be good to the people near you.
Yeah. Well, and it is an age, I mean, and it will be, it's about to be, I guess, an age um, of big municipal, large, big city municipal public works projects, right? Like the New York subway opens in 1904. So, yeah, it's so there are I mean, but that's done. Um, I have to imagine that that is a kind of a public a public private, sort of partnership
I
financing.
mean, the subway was mostly built privately, actually.
Yeah,
There's this New York subway system was, that was demand based by, these were companies
right,
that were, and an awful lot of the investors of those companies were people who, were real estate,
right, right,
people who
Yeah.
wanted to. I
right.
mean, I live in a building that was built in 1906, and it was built because the one train was about to come up to, Manhattanville, which was previously it was an actual little village in northern Manhattan. And but hey, now suddenly there's going to be someplace you could reasonably commute to and from.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and suddenly, instead of like shacks and the like,
Hmm.
you've
Yep.
got buildings,
Yeah.
a 5-story tenement like mine, 6-story tenement like mine is. It's like, oh my gosh, you can make a lot of money up here.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really interesting story of New York is sort of the gradual growth of the city northward along Manhattan, and then
And then
and then
explodes once
and then
yeah.
exploding in the early the early 20th century, and then especially between the wars. I think that's probably when when the trains reach places like New Rochelle, right? And
Oh, the trains, yeah, there was regular train service. It was more the commuter rail was a big
yeah,
deal.
commuter rail reaches. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Well, and how much in those cities were those things company town sorts of structures where, I'm the company and I'm going to run the company store and get the money back.
Mhm.
I'll pay you the money, but then we're getting it all back on the back end
Mhm.
and we can double dip.
Yeah.
Versus, or like, hey, let's build we need a train system to get people out to the jobs that we need them to do. So
Right.
we can
Right. Well,
fund the,
We need the train to sell real estate is almost always what happens. I mean,
oh
look
yeah.
at the
I mean,
look at
that's all of railroad history. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like yeah. So
Yeah. I mean, that's the premise of Once Upon a Time in the West, right?
mhm.
That spaghetti Western movie. So, because it's a piece of desert that that there's a train that's going to come through it.
Yeah,
But yeah, but this period too at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century is that period of the consolidation of all of the entire American rail network down into 5 or 6
yeah.
companies, Wall Street, based blocks of investment, and the biggest one until the interstate um, suit is J.P. Morgan, and especially in the Northeast, of course, they tried to corner that whole rail market. So there's a weird thing going on with again this sort of, I mean, I'm calling it bureaucratization of these things that had, at least to some extent. In the case of the railroads, it's also complicated with land grants and financing and all of that. But there does seem to me to be a shift into a kind of a more corporate bureaucracy kind of management. And I'm getting this feeling that Herbert Hoover is, part of this new generation of managers. There's a moment in there that I highlighted where the author says whatever his subject matter, he's talking about him putting editorials in, and sometimes putting straw man editorials in that he can then, and anonymously, that he can then react to with his own name attached to the letter to the editor or whatever. But he says whatever his subject, Hoover's tone was always businesslike. He knew his limits. He did not seek to be known as a personality. His intention was that his achievements and his status would be recognized. So,
Which does play back to an earlier thing where he writes the survey of the mine for use in a later purchase of the mine, right? He publishes this anyway.
Yeah.
So his dipping is
So he's, yeah,
Did he learn that from Constance Duguid though?
yeah, right.
You know, was that a well-known thing by his time that, you plant a story and then
right.
you
And you
rail against it. So as an example, in this last week or maybe 2 weeks, Trump shows up on Maria Bartiromo and spins a story. Hey, you know, gas prices by the midterms are probably going to be roughly about where they're at now. They're going to be high. And then 2 or 3 days later, she asks him roughly the same question. He's like, I don't know where this rumor about gas prices are going to be high. And he's literally like, he says a polar opposite things
and
3 days apart on the same show and says it's a lie.
Yeah.
But it calls it a rumor, not something he said himself two
was he
days.
responding to that because it also didn't one of his like his energy spokesperson or someone say yes we're going to see prices through 2027,
Yeah, probably.
right? So yeah, I mean it's the administration that doesn't have a narrative. So
Yeah.
Well, the one narrative they seem to be able to stick to that I saw in testimony this week is no one under oath in a confirmation hearing will actively say that Donald John Trump did not win the election. They just won't. They dodge around it. Oh, and what happened. You guys determined the winner, but no one will say he lost. They just won't say those words. It's almost hilarious to watch these, hearings to see that happen. And it's like, really?
The rote response is, Joe Biden was sworn in and served. That's, I
Yeah.
believe, there's a
Yeah.
specific formulation they've been using. Like, Joe Biden was sworn in and was sworn in and served.
Well, it's the equivalent now too of just showing up as a Supreme Court nominee and just saying, waving your hands and saying "stare decisis," but then once you're on the bench, you litigate the other way.
Mhm. Yeah.
What struck me, and I didn't really think about it until I'm staring at the contents now, um, is we actually see, presumably in a letter that he wrote to a family member or a friend, a future sitting president uttering the words, "I am the devil," and really meaning it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so the it's a weird thing because the other thing I'm looking at through here is this, the idea of a Christian nation and how does that sit with respect to individual people. It's one thing, hey, we've got a multi-billionaire who actually physically tithes and gives away 10% versus, a sitting president who earlier in his life said and actually meant, I'm here in hell. And I
Hmm.
think he highlighted too in some of his letters the word hell multiple times in some of the passages. Like this backwater he's in is really horrible.
That's the chapter I'm actually about to start. But yet, in context for that, is he decrying his own behavior when he said,
Um,
"I'm the devil"?
he's and the word slave driver is used several times as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
I don't know. I'd have to go back and see if I don't know that he calls himself a slave driver,
No,
but
I think,
his bosses certainly like, oh, the Hoover is a slave driver, and I wish I had more of
and they're
him.
using that as praise. Yeah. Yeah. But and White doesn't really kind of weigh in on that until he says, as the author and enforcer of Bewick Mooring's Australian labor policies, Hoover bore the brunt of the implicit criticisms in the report. This is a Royal Commission report. He was also ultimately responsible for safety levels in his properties. On several occasions between 1903 and 1905, Bewick Mooring was cited for dangerous and unhealthy work conditions. Workers were said to be unduly exposed to dust and fumes and falling rock. So he does seem to have been rather ruthless with regard to the conditions under which people had to work, but I guess he probably would have said under which people chose to work, right? And
Yeah.
then and then later on, he's also quoted, Hoover is quoted as saying that, that labor unions are, not only a fact of life, but are an effective way for, atomized workers to stand up to, centralized corporate power. So
What what
he seems
years
to be
were
kind of a
these?
realist about it.
What years were these that he's in Australia? 18,
Uh, well,
like late
1905,
18?
1903 to 1905 is the part that the Royal Commission is looking at. And that's on about, in my Kindle, it's on about page 99.
Yeah. So this is before like the shirtwaist fire factory
Oh, yeah, yeah.
fire.
Yeah, that's
And
1912.
this is before, Taylorism and efficiency out of businesses. I mean, the dimensions of efficiency and pulling out efficiency to me were kind of interesting in this period of industrialization, just leading up to kind of the scientific
Mhm.
idea of management
Right.
that
Well, there
shows
had
up
been, I mean, but
within the decade.
even before the Triangle Fire, there had been, I mean, textile mills had fallen down, had actually collapsed under the weight of, newer, more, heavier machinery being put in them, from the 1860s onward. And I mean, and in my environmental history chapter where I talk about the textile mills, I end with one of those, and it happened in 1860, and and hundreds of women died, and hundreds more were injured, and there was for a while in the press a lot of kind of blaming the owners who had, and there was an investigation done, and criminal negligence was found because they were limited liability corporations, right? Nobody really, um, they
And I
sold
think
they sold the business, and then they laid low for 5 years or so, and then they kind of came back and made money again.
yeah, and I think Sinclair Lewis's The Jungle was 1905 too, which was
Yeah,
kind of a factory worker safety as well as like this is what you're eating
right,
kind of
right,
story.
right. And he said he had aimed for America's heart, and he had hit it in the stomach. Yeah,
I mean, but when you're talking about, back to sort of the, they chose to work,
yeah,
and that does sort of, again, go back to the part of the book I've read, which is his childhood and his, he was forced labor, for quite some time,
yeah.
and was, but once he gets out of the forced labor, he's working 12 hours a day on his own thing. So he definitely I think he sees it as I mean, I think there is an argument to be made. I don't know why I'm sitting here defending the guy, but I find him an interesting character.
I do. Well, and it's an argument that Andrew Carnegie could have made too, right? I came over on a boat,
Yeah,
with
the
not
nickel.
without 2 dimes in my pocket
Yeah,
to scrape together,
yeah. But
and look where I am now.
I mean,
Uh,
he literally did. I mean, again, Hoover. We really do hear again in these early stories about he worked his tail off. He had that at menial, difficult jobs.
Mhm.
For a very long time. Or even I liked the bit where when he's at Stanford, he started two different businesses and then sold them when he left.
Sold them to other students, yeah, so they could
Yeah,
hustle too.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
be like me. Yeah,
well,
and
it's
that was. I mean, there's a
it's
little bit of
also part of that mythology though of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. So you
totally.
have these examples of people, the rags to riches or the Horatio Alger stories kind of
Yep.
milieu, but literally these are one in multiple millions examples, not, the story of you know, the Vanderbilts
Right,
who had money and kept
right,
money and,
right.
generational wealth over time.
Right. And the argument that comes from that, I think, is an interesting one. It is that, it's not a guarantee that everybody will, because it takes a lot of luck, right? It takes, I mean, the Horatio Alger thing was that, that just by being honest and diligent and respectful, you can rise in the world. but it doesn't acknowledge, the incredible amount of luck, but also,
or fibbing
also
about
the
your
other.
salary and station in life and your age, which this president does.
The thing now, I mean, the argument that we're having now seems not to be about that. It seems not to be as much about, whether our, I mean, the argument now, the argument for equity seems to challenge the premises of that and say that, that there are institutional, inequalities that mean that premise doesn't apply, or it only applies to some people, that you have to be, a white boy or whatever in order to, have, to even get on that train to the potential Horatio Alger, experience, getting up to whatever level that you can get to, that your diligence and your honesty and your luck can get you to, right? But that the luck thing, we don't, I mean, the argument is, right, that the luck thing, we don't compensate you for if you have the bad luck, right? What we're, that's just, that's the way the world is, right? Some people are going to be lucky and some people are not going to be lucky. The two things that confound that are what you just said, Chris, the Vanderbilt, generational wealth, right? And then also the, institutional racism or whatever, or sexism that prevents people from even having the opportunity to participate in that chance, in that endeavor, in that gamble.
Or not even so much, Vanderbilt level wealth, but I mean, we talk about, your Musk or Bill Gates or Jesus, who's the Facebook guy? My brain is going.
Zuckerberg, yeah. Well, they're all legacy. They were all legacy.
They were all legacy. These are all people who came from, not massive wealth, but came from very nice situations and and had enormous advantages already. So there's luck versus advantage, significant advantages. I mean, how many actual rags to riches stories there are out there are, very few, actual rags to riches, or actual even, moderate middle class to riches, stories. I mean, are rare.
Right. There's a book called The Sun Also Rises, S-O-N, Sun, by a guy named Gregory Clark, published in 2014, which is exactly about that. It's about, he's an economist and he tracks surnames and, and sort of the persistence of wealth, but also social status and privilege and all of that in these kind of surname groups. So
yeah. And if I remember too, I saw some data on African American wealth. And if you're lucky enough to be an African American man who becomes a multimillionaire, the likelihood that you pass that wealth on to the next generation is it's just abysmally low. For all kinds of institutional reasons.
Well, you're still going to have a 25-30% chance of, your male kids are still going to have a 20 or 30% chance of end up having a prison record, it's a lot harder to.
Is that true? Is that true across all classes in African American communities? Or
I know you got a significant.
Is there even a single African American community at this point?
You have a significantly higher rate of getting across all classes as an African American, of being involved, getting involved in the having with the justice system, than significantly higher.
Okay, but
I don't. I can't give you numbers really quickly here. Obviously, I didn't pull this off the top of my butt. But
yeah, I wonder. The thing that I wonder about that is, if you say that, that 30% of white kids in single families in poverty in cities, have this sort of experience of brushes with the law and incarceration and all that kind of stuff, and and black kids are 25% more likely to, or 25% more black kids do, then 25% of 30% is a significant, to me, it's numerically, not only statistically, but
Yeah.
numerically significant quantity. Whereas if you say that, that of the 1%, white, kids, white teenagers, 1% of them have a brush with the law. And of the 1%, black kids are 25% more likely to have a brush with the law. Then that just means, a couple more black kids than the very small number of white kids, right?
Yeah. Well, and when it's, 90-10 or maybe 70 or 80% versus the 10% of African Americans in the broader population.
Right. But yeah, right. But when we talk about the prison industrial complex, and we talk about the fact that it's predominantly black, we're not, there's a huge class element to that.
Yeah. And socioeconomic, just broadly in general.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean by class. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to
Back to this.
Well, an important question, and I meant to ask it a few minutes ago. So every now and then, Dan, you read us a good quote relevant to what we're looking at, and you're looking at your screen when you do it.
Yes. So I have.
Are those notes you're pulling out of your note repository, or did you find the section in the book and you happen to be reading it out of the digital version of the book you're looking at?
Yes, I have. So I have the Zoom window kind of stretched out on the bottom of my screen, and then above it I have the Kindle. And what I'm doing is, as we're talking, I'm just sort of slowly paging forward in the Kindle version, and then every once in a while I'll see a highlight that I want to wait till there's a change in the topic, or a moment to change the topic, and I'll throw it in. So the one that I'm on right now is the one that Hoover would later obtain and apparently destroy every copy of the court minutes that he could find of the lawsuit that Chang brings in London against him for his for the alleged duplicity in the negotiations. And that idea of sort of expunging the record really kind of jumped out at me, and controlling the not only the narrative in the moment, but also kind of what was left for history to find.
Yeah. Well, and that presumes that history would want to find it about you years or decades later. Like,
well, yeah, and he's imagining himself as somebody who's going to remain in the public eye and still, and in the future be concerned about his reputation, right?
But until that point, too, I don't see any kind of early inclinations of, I want to go into a life of public service, which is really,
right.
We're 100 pages in.
Yeah.
And there's another 600 pages of I not only served my own presidency, but served presidents before me and presidents after me. So it's a massive life of broad public service.
Right.
That, he starts out in business fending for just himself, but
right.
then
And he's Secretary of Commerce even before that, right? So yeah. So he makes a shift into government at some point, but even earlier on, right, in the earlier chapters, in like 4 and 5, right, he's when he's leaving Bewick Mooring, right, in London, and kind of going out, hanging his own shingle out, he's very concerned that he wants to sort of leave behind the shady practices that he himself did on Bewick Mooring's behalf, and be seen as kind of a grand character in the mining industry, kind of writ large.
But that's a question, though, is what nudges this shift in I am the devil, which is another reason maybe he chooses that quote as the chapter title.
Yeah.
Is to show that shift. But what is it that's causing that shift? Is it his early religious upbringing, the way he was brought up? Is there some, is it his wife? Is it his family, people around him? What is the pivot for that?
Well,
switch?
I would suggest that Whyte is going to suggest that it is the experience of whatever level, whatever degree of London, of British society that that he exposes himself to in chapter 6, right, which is called What Lies Beyond Wealth. Right. So it seems like this is where the transition is beginning to happen. Right. And what he talks about at the beginning of this chapter, I read about the first 2/3 of it so far, was, is this, how they entertain constantly. Their home is, they live in this very posh district, and they're, the best seller in Kensington, and they're entertaining constantly. And some of the people are, this global, sort of mining elite, but some of them are, authors and artists and Stanford people and Americans in general. And some of them are very boring, according to one of his friends, but some of them are are interesting. And so this exposure, I am going to speculate, leads to this idea, and the influence of Lou, his wife, kind of leads him to this transition. Because at the beginning of the chapter, White describes him as, says one acquaintance considered him the bluntest man in Europe, and another the rudest man in London. And then I think this is the chapter where he's going to make a turn. They go to the theater, they see Gilbert and Sullivan and Shaw and Shakespeare, and he reads all the time, reads a volume a day.
I mean, I'd like to come back to the reading bit, because in the first sections, the first 2 chapters, he's highlighted as never reading.
Virtually illiterate.
He read the Bible, and that's the text he has. And then he meets, I guess, as a high school age student, a teacher who takes he and a colleague under her wing to some degree, and he starts reading there. And then suddenly, when we're getting into the journey to Australia and from Australia to China, he's apparently consuming vast quantities of information in books and reports and texts and everything. And it's not explained, though, and maybe because the material's not there, the emotional transition there, because something happened that turned him.
I think probably. I mean, and I think you're right, Eric. He reads constantly, right? And he's not womanizing as far as White is describing his private life. Right?
Yes,
so he's got no other distractions on these long trips to Australia or South Africa or wherever he's going.
What else is he going to do? Yeah, besides read, yeah.
And it rubs off on him.
Read and make fun of the English, apparently.
Yeah, yeah. But then he also develops, by about, God, what is this now? Page 110. He's developing this notion that this friend of his, and the weirdest thing, he's always corresponding with women, right? So he's got this, I mean, Freud would have some things to say about that. But
as does White sort of makes a side reference to,
yeah.
looking for both parents is the interesting thing that.
Right. Right, but especially looking for validation of women, and actually exposing his private life, and to whatever extent he can get in touch with his emotions, which doesn't seem to be a whole lot. But that this woman Austen has difficulty with his notion of a heroic engineer, and he complains that she was trying to make a villain out of the engineer, which won't do. He insists that the lead role be a martyr. And he argues about these physical, intellectual, and educational passages of a successful man that could never produce a bad person. So he's got him. I mean, he's obviously thinking about himself and his wanting to be the hero of his own story desperately.
Well, that's what he does even in college. Remember, back at Stanford, where I'm the manager, means I'm really in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's that. I remember that very specific little quote. It's like, because I'm the class treasurer. And he only got pulled in a little bit. I'm the treasurer. That means I'm in charge. I'm
virtually spelled wrong. In charge. Yeah.
That's the same in Australia as well, I think, where he sort of inflates his value to his employer.
Yeah. And
perhaps strategically, in order to gain hand and putting down the miners to their place as he sees it.
What
And
is
then,
interesting too is that
Actually,
he
he's
has
always been.
financial, he's got financial positions all the way through until he moves from commerce secretary into the next big jump.
mhm.
Mhm.
But it's all treasurer, manager,
Right.
Yeah.
running his own company. It's all financial positions that put him ultimately into a position of power or ultimate power.
But okay, yeah, again, even in the he's always overlooked, certainly as a child, and again, in what I've read so far, he is someone who actually is generally overlooked. It's like, oh,
Or
great, he's
feels overlooked.
indispensable and useful, but he's not the star ever.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and he's not George Hurst, right? Although apparently his number one boy in China said that he could look at the ground and see gold, but you know he was not known as in the way that Hearst was as the great prospector or anything like that. I really do. I'm gonna go back to my harping on this idea that he is this new he's the new American economic man, the bureaucrat, right? Both in corporations and then later in government, right? White says Hoover had a gift of, and he's quoting somebody here, I don't know who he's quoting, a gift of juggling corporate assets in such a manner that insiders almost always benefited. Whatever happened to the capital of the original shareholders? He was masterful at wielding write-offs and preference shares with multiple voting power on the grounds that new capital was required to avert bankruptcy. His favorite deals were those so complicated that no one else could figure out how they worked. So you could place him, you know, you
Yeah,
could put him at OpenAI and he would be hugely successful. You know,
yeah. Or he could be the guy creating, structured debt that led up to the crash in
right,
'08. Or
right.
he could be
Or Sam Bankman-Fried.
the high volume frequency, trader.
Mhm.
You get into the really complicated, or he would have been in some sense, for his era, he was the mathematical physicist who got his degree, left and went
And,
to Wall Street,
became a hedge fund guy.
became a quant
Yeah,
and used his,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
technical background to, you know,
yeah.
machinate his way into
Right.
the new
Right. Well,
space.
there was another thing that I highlighted. I can't find the page right now, but when he leaves Buick Mooring, right, and Algernon Mooring is kind of watching him, because he has claimed to be the guy that no contract could hold. There was no contract that was so well written that he couldn't find a way to wiggle out of it. And I'm misquoting that, but that was the gist of that passage, which I thought was interesting. Just that's a different thing. That's not being an entrepreneur, right? That's something else. And this is the time and this is the moment. And he's like the prototype of this new thing, I think. And that's one of the reasons for his success is because he's the first guy up on that wave, or one of the first people.
Yeah. Who was the Algernon that ruined it for all the rest? Because nobody names their kid that anymore.
I don't know. Well, it's not since Flowers for Algernon, I guess. But he was a
Was
mouse.
that was that where the dip in naming kids Algernon
Could
just
have been.
fell off the cliff?
Or Swinburne, maybe it was.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so he's described. Yeah, so there's this part where he, and again, and White, and I think White does a good job of reminding us how early in the game this is, right? So when he was born, there were 7,000, or when in his boyhood there were 7,000 engineers, and then White says the ranks of engineers would expand 20-fold by the middle of his life, and they would claim and impressive feats like the Brooklyn Bridge on the Panama Canal. So this is the heyday, and
Well,
you get some
and
points for being an early, for being an early
even in
person.
honor to him, they renamed the dam later to Hoover Dam
Oh, right. The
as an engineering feat,
Yep.
you know, for power. What's interesting too, and I'll go back 2 or 3 minutes ago to, and I actually appreciate that Will has only read to chapter 2 because it forces us to go back and keep thinking about his childhood. So thank you for being lazy this week because it really I the fact that you're so focused on this piece and dragging us back, I think has been phenomenally helpful.
I
But
usually read
what's
ahead.
interesting, but you mentioned he's like the second banana in a lot of the times, and if you, I remember reading through when I did my just cursory read of the book, looking at all the photos and the subtitles of the photos. And even in a bunch of the photos, it very specifically, he's the second banana standing just behind. He's not dressed as well or as ostentatious. So it's like really apparent he's the number two and he's not trying to draw
Hmm.
attention away from the principal as he's going through, especially some of the early cabinet positions, he's always back behind the president, who looks kind of more regal or more ostentatious. Um, but even so, even the story and the photos kind of mirrors that same kind of overarching thing.
Hmm.
And now that you know, I think White does an incredibly good job of telegraphing the story in chapter titles. Now, just even in the first 6 chapters,
Hmm.
um, where at least in the I am the devil and then what lies beyond wealth is the here's what's coming.
Hmm.
And for the story of a president broadly that no one cares about or thinks
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
or if we do, it's always in negative terms because of the idea of the Hooverville, I think,
Right.
has totally subsumed this guy's life, and that's what we think about him now, rather than
Yeah.
in hearing an overview. I'm more interested in how does he, or even to your thesis, Dan, of he's the new, Homo economist Americanus,
Yeah.
like he is what America is now.
Right. Right.
And how
Well.
do you go back and look at that with that lens of he creates big chunks of our,
Hmm.
or at least, and I coincidentally this week I watched, it's a 2015 documentary called Best of Enemies, and it's the political coverage of the 68 election where William F. Buckley Jr. and Gore Vidal head off. And
Oh, yeah.
and
Great
and that
documentary.
becomes like a pivotal, ABC is in third, they're in fourth place out of four networks covering the news. And because they can't do wall-to-wall coverage, they bring in these two guys, and the politics they represent is kind of another quirky shift in the mid late century
Hmm.
that gets us to where we are now. But all the quirky roots seem to be showing up in Hoover of who we are politically, or at least if he's not creating them, he certainly is a microcosm
Hmm.
of them.
Right. But also, I will stand by the Homo economicus Americanus, but also De Re Metallica. Who would
Mhm.
imagine that a guy, and Will, this happens in chapter 6. He and his wife create the first English translation of Agricola's text,
Mhm.
and and nobody has ever tried to do it because it's half in bad Latin and half in technical German, of like Middle High German or whatever. And so so it was almost impossible to translate, but they work on it for 5 years and they publish it, and they get a gold medal, a special gold medal for distinguished service to the Mining and Metallurgical Society of America. And I mean, who would have imagined that the guy from the first couple of chapters who never read a book beside the Bible would do this thing? So this is a whole lot. I mean, so you can't, you can't imagine. I can't imagine him as this two-dimensional character. I mean, he's this is, if anything, this is a passion project.
The only actual, and I love the Homo economic America, but the only thing I might suggest there is not so much who we are now as opposed to you know again the organization man or whatever, they
Hmm.
who I think I would guess that more he is who we were for a very long period, but I don't,
Right.
and maybe I'm giving the past a little too much credit. But I feel like, again, from what I know, other things about him. But again, like you're talking about, this passion project of doing something,
Yeah.
is, I think, reminiscent to me of more a sense of real public,
Yeah.
as a responsibility in public, sort of
Yeah.
public responsibility that I think was particularly emblematic of of up until maybe the 70s or 80s,
Yeah.
in sort of the prototypical, business, corporate, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it.
Well, and maybe there's a disconnect between his self-conception and what he actually does. Because I would say that he sort of acts as Homo economicus Americanus, but he thinks of himself as a combination of Francisco d'Anconia and Hank Rearden from Atlas Shrugged. He is this incredibly romantic character who is, you know, creating and, and doing, and actually doing things
Titan
in the
of
world.
industry, a literal titan of industry.
Yeah, a literal titan. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yeah. And so, yeah. So, and I think I think it's kind of funny because as I was reading, that part where he's trying to commission this friend of his wife's to write a play for Broadway or whatever, where he'll be he will be, or a person just like him will be the protagonist martyr, right? So it's a super, I mean, because you got to be an incredible romantic to want to be a martyr, and oh, cool, wow, Chris, that looks really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a short little kind of blog piece, but it kind of one of the weird things too, and when you think of America now as or earlier America as a creator culture, a builder culture, something, and now everybody online wants to be a creator or a
Hmm.
something.
Yeah.
Um, this article kind of
Influencers, what they want to be.
in
Influencers.
some sense, it's like they delve into the history of mining and metallurgy and realize that they've been part of a career of engineers and makers who
It
go
goes
way
back to the
back.
ancient world. Yeah.
But because they both, kind of studied engineering and science at Stanford, like, oh, we're engineering is kind of a new career in America, but it's always been a thing.
Hmm.
And when you're looking at like early industrialization in the United States, the fact that it's, some of the professions that presidents have had, Ben Franklin being a journalist and a newspaper guy, or Herbert Hoover being a metallurgist
Hmm.
and an engineer,
Right.
and where we go as a result, or
Right.
decisions that are made in the country because of those early careers, you know.
Right. Well, and it goes back to, I mean, and it's a honorable and an important tradition that goes on. I mean, even the mining and metallurgy part, right? Leibniz was involved in the German mines, and so this is like the beginning of so this is the sort of the technical or engineering side of natural philosophy, natural science that, arguably led to the purer science that kind of led to the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So, so they can sort of hark back to a very important tradition in Western civilization and see themselves as part of it. And I think that's entirely legitimate and must have been cool for them. They must have just reveled in that.
What struck me too, and I want to say maybe it was chapter 3 or maybe the beginning of chapter 4, where Lou Hoover, wants to go out and have a job and she can't get one,
Yeah.
even with help. And it's kind of an early, and it's presumably at a time when women were not doing these types of technical jobs, or it wasn't common, and that's part of why she's having trouble finding it. I think she said her AB degree, somewhere in there was a quote, my AB degree must be, you know, about something boys. Um, but then she's writing this and doing this translation with Hoover, and
Hmm.
I kind of wonder too what was that, workload. He's off doing other stuff, and is she doing more of this research and translation work than he did? Was it pure collaboration between the two? I don't see or get a sense of what that looked like
Hmm.
or who she was, other than, through the pictures and some of the descriptions thus far, she's a tomboy in some sense, or another one of the boys,
Hmm.
but I don't get a fuller picture of who she was, and I kind of wish somewhere along here, I'm sure he delves into it a little
Yeah.
better, but
Yeah.
I was hoping for more on her other than this, flimsy sense I'm getting so far.
Hmm. Well,
Um,
and apparently she stays really, really connected with what's his name, Branning or whatever, that their professor back at Stanford, right? Because while he's, when she travels with him, or sometimes she even travels on her own to go out and get samples geological samples to send back to this guy at Stanford. So they, which was interesting. It seemed like they also both had kind of social circles that were, that intersected a little bit, but not really that much. And so that probably expanded his opportunities quite a bit. He did like the Burmese though. Although he was a screaming racist, he thought the Burmese were very happy. Uh, it's funny. But this idea that that he does, I think he does think of himself very, very, very romantically, right? This idea that he went and he found this ancient Chinese mine in Burma, right? And he turned it into something that produced 135 million ounces of silver and over 1 million tons of lead. Um, and employed, and apparently he was proud of the fact that it employed 100,000 Shans and Chinese. So he thinks of himself as
well, it's that
as a
that
as a
creator
as
idea.
as a titan. Yeah,
Yeah, I found this thing, I created the thing that keeps all these people busy and doing
right. Well,
work.
and I brought back this thing that was not that was just a vague legend. So he's almost like, I mean, I picture him sort of imagining himself as Indiana Jones at this point. I
Yeah.
found the ancient mine.
Okay,
Yeah.
but in the case of the Chinese mine, if I recall correctly, it had been developed and he was just appalled at the working methods used. So and I haven't gotten to the Burmese scenario, was that terra incognita or was it an existing property that he then
It
wrote?
was a mine that had been worked that was legendary. It had been worked from 1400 to 1850, and it had taken what White calls the most accessible silver.
I
But
see.
he
Okay, so
digs
then
deeper, and ultimately the
modern
real
techniques.
the real productive vein is about 700 feet below the part that they had actually mined.
Yeah. So it's not even the discovery is the bigger thing, but it's I'm better at the exploitation of the thing.
Well, and he would argue bringing modern working methods and technologies, right?
Well,
between
see,
age.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, and I don't know if this is entirely an artifact of the way that White narrates it, but
Sure.
the sense that I got was of this thing was nothing more than a whispered, kind of a legend of a mine that had existed, that was talked about by locals and stuff, like the El Dorado, kind of thing of Burma. And he went into the jungle and found it. And then
So
turned it into
so
something bigger than it had ever been. Yeah.
how much of
And
that is
it's been
White? How much of
and
that
it's
is Hoover's presentation of it to the
Right.
world?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that he was this person, but I think he imagined himself as being this guy.
But also created the narrative so that it existed outside of his head,
Oh, and he
right?
portrayed himself. Yeah, he
Right.
portrayed himself in his
And sold stock in it, probably.
public persona, right? And traded on that image of himself. Yeah. Whereas actually, I would still argue that mostly what he was doing, especially as when he was the devil in China, working for doing more uh, Buick Mooring, that he was this new bureaucratic organizational man. So it's kind of a weird. These I think these two elements of his character are going to continue to be um, important throughout the rest of his career.
what does strike me too here, and I think it's the relationship with the "I am the devil" quote. Um, and when we talk about him fashioning his story of who he is, I'm reminded of the book "Devil in the White City,"
Oh yeah.
which is the story of the 1893 World's Fair, where a serial killer is operating amidst the World's Fair, and because of the way records are kept or not kept, he can hire and build this torture house to do, you know, his serial killing within. And it's
Hmm.
very hard to track him down because nobody's keeping records of debt defaults. There's no stories, and it's the story you tell about yourself is the one that everyone hears
Hmm.
and begins to believe. And he's in this roughly the same time and place here, because this
Yeah.
is, 1893 to, the early 1900s.
Hmm.
You can create a story because no one else is tracking you and able to do it. And if the people around you believe this story, they're going
Hmm.
to tell others, and that's how you build this mythical thing. Um,
Interesting corollary then to the whole Nexus surveillance stuff from the
Hmm.
last book.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and
Or even
right,
how
and to the anonymity that cities at that moment were beginning to afford people, that Nexus has said is gone now. Yeah.
and it's even more curious that now when we have the ability to look at the receipts, that the mythology you build around yourself is more powerful than the actual story, the real truth.
Hmm.
So when we look back at the last book where it's a story of mythology and history versus actual truth,
Well, and shared illusions. Yeah.
and the shared illusions, and then what order does that create? How do those two things create the actual order that you need or want or should have?
Hmm.
Um, is kind of a fascinating way to look at presidential history of
Yeah.
what is the mythology you skew versus, and even in his case, he he got rid of a lot of letters, so there's a lot of
Right.
history on Hoover we don't have because he physically destroyed it, and also talks about even destroying these court records as a means of you know so who we can know who he was is shifted because of what he's destroyed and what he did. Just quirky, fascinating
Hmm.
tidbits versus a president 100 years ago versus a president roughly now, and that's roughly where we're at. Is we're looking back 100 years.
Mhm. Well,
And
and the parallels to today, yeah, to today's presidency are interesting. In the self perception or the legend that yeah, he's changing the story every day, but the legend that he seems to be trying to create and inhabit, um, and then the reality, which is seems to be really at odds with it. Yeah, so this has been a good introduction to this book, I think. So
And
next,
Hoover's more
Some catch
fascinating, I
up
think, than
and
I
get
would have given.
ahead. So we should go with the timeline that works.
okay, so we'll go. So for next week, we'll go with the next section then.
Yeah,
All right.
which gets to what? Just so I've got a target for
Well,
me.
let me see.
It's for me. It's better chapter names because I don't really see. I'm on the
Okay,
Kindle
yeah, it would go
or chapter number.
to Inconsolable in the Hall of Mirrors.
Okay,
Chapter 11.
gotcha. So
Okay, so that will be
E to
the
chapter.
Hall of Mirrors is Versailles. Okay, so we go through the end of World War One.
So we will read chapter 11.
Yeah,
We'll read
Up
chapter
to and
11.
including up to and
Yeah.
including chapter 11. Cool,
Yeah.
cool, cool.
Mhm.
which
It's
gets
again. I started reading this last night. It's a fast read. So it'll be no problem for me to catch
Yeah,
up.
yeah. It's. I think it's written well.
Yeah.
I, it's kind of funny. I sort of feel about White the way I felt. I think the Morgan. Maybe the J.P. Morgan biography was its author's first was that Ron Chernow, I think, wrote the J.P.
He's a good
Morgan,
author.
and I think that was his first book ever. And I think he's gotten better since then. But I thought his approach to Morgan was a little bit too credulous. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm not sure about White at this point, but
What is
I
it's
think
White?
that I
It's
think that Hoover is a really rich character.
Yeah, or richer than I would have thought to give him credit for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I guess then if you're talking about somebody at the forefront of history and culture for that time,
That
like
long. Yeah.
you almost have to expect.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, he does explicitly say in the introduction or whatever that the right approach for biography is to is to describe and document, not to judge. I'm paraphrasing slightly,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. I'm not looking for him to tell me definitively, but I'm feeling every once in a while I'm feeling like maybe there was more to be said about this, or there was, or you could have dug a little bit deeper, but
well,
that's,
it's also tough too because most of the people who would have been of his time and generation are dead now, so
yeah.
you can't do firsthand interviews the way if you're researching Bob Moses in the 70s,
Right.
you can go out and find all the people he worked with,
Yep.
and he's kind of dead and gone or so powerless at the time you're writing that biography. It's a lot easier to get more material
Hmm.
to pull out versus somebody who not only is his generation gone, but that even the generation that came after him is potentially
Right.
gone now as well. And he's burned all these letters and the historical things that might back up and document.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I wonder when he
and
burned the letters, because I mean, you would imagine. I mean, maybe presidential libraries weren't really such a big thing during the
Well,
Depression.
he certainly got one. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, he's definitely got one. But
Right. Right. But maybe they didn't try to scrape the stuff together early enough and
I did
give time to.
discover too, I mentioned the William F. Buckley thing. So, in a confluence of all the crazy events this week, I discovered that the typewriter Buckley started his newsletter, his magazine on, got donated to the Hoover Institution, is now
Oh wow.
held there, which just kind of goes back. So, I'm super curious to see not only what Hoover's politics were, but what the politics of the Hoover institution are today versus what his philosophy was
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh, and by the way, congratulations on your new card catalog.
Oh, hey, well, it needs some work, but we'll get there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's definitely missing. It's missing a few pieces, I think.
Hmm. It's a lot of 3x5 drawers.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, you know, I do have, a bunch
Oh,
of
okay. Okay. You got another use
the
for it. Yep.
the whiskey and scotch collection
Yep.
can,
All right. That fits
use a
in it.
chunk of it. So,
If
you
you
know.
take you got to take the rods out to fit the
Oh,
bottle.
well, that's the best part is this one came with no rods, which kind of drives me a little crazy, but
Yeah.
you do with it what you can.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And nowadays you're lucky to find them.
Yeah, well, or find them for $200.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
It's like I saw it and I sent her a message right away, and within an hour and a half, I picked it up because I knew it was going to be gone.
Yes.
So
Yeah. I actually between the time that we
I'm
saw
here.
the one that I have, which is only a six drawer on Facebook Marketplace, and we got there to pick it up. They had originally offered it for 200, and then apparently the woman who was like an old school teacher, her daughter said, "You can't let that go for 200." So I had to give her like 400 for it,
Yeah.
which was
Well,
still a steal.
this one, the woman said it was her husband's, and he used it for baseball cards for 30 years.
Oh my goodness, that's cool.
And they were kind of cleaning some stuff out, and she's like, "Oh, let's get rid of it." And she said, I was originally going to list it for like 100, 150, and my husband said, "What?"
Hmm.
So out of deference to him, she priced it higher, but then she had like 8 people contact her by the time I got there, it was 2 hours, and she's like, "Oh, 6 or 7 people have like commented on it."
Yeah.
But by then I was also sitting in front of it, and I was like, "Well, it's like you may have listed it for more and got a little more, and if you want, I'm happy to." She's like, "No, no, no." She's like, "Take it and enjoy it." It's
Hmm.
like I know what the market will bear on these, and roughly you're with the condition this is in, you're within the realm of this is not a bad price. So
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't made up my inventory for the moving company. I sort of have, but I haven't put a value on the card catalog. But it's certainly going to be more than $400 because there's no way I can replace it for that.
oh yeah, yeah, that's well, I think the problem was there were 2 or 3 furniture places that stripped them down, refinished them, sanded them, restained them. And once you've done all that work, yeah, you've got a piece of fine furniture that's worth 5 grand.
Yeah.
And then when you peg that number, suddenly everybody thinks theirs has got to be worth that much too because
Mhm.
of the nostalgia factor.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah. 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 And I have absolutely no idea what value to put on the barrister's cabinet because that cannot be replaced at all.
yeah.
So
Well, those usually, I have been slowly watching them, and I haven't been watching what they're actually selling for,
yeah.
but 2, 3 thousand, depending on who the manufacturer was and what kind of condition it's in.
Right. I'll show
Are
you.
they?
It's
Is it older? Is it stackable? Or is it I mean, the one behind me is a kind of a modern reproduction,
yeah.
so it's not
That's not completely in focus, but it's
yeah,
the thing that it's got going for it is that like desk piece in the middle.
yeah, yeah. And if
So
if it's truly modular,
yeah,
those are worth a lot more.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But it's not, I mean, I would never get rid of it. I'm just thinking about if it gets destroyed on the way. But
I will say too, those things are a lot easier to find in the Midwest and on the East Coast than they are
oh,
in
I'll bet.
California.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they're more expensive out here because there are fewer of them.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I think my parents got it in, you know, some in Boston, and they probably picked it up
Yeah. My
close
parents
to
had a
free.
couple in Connecticut, and
Yeah,
I think they still have one of them, but I don't think they have all of the ones in moving around, they
Right. Right.
lost a few. So.
Yep. Yep. Well, it's here now. I had to bring it here so that I can, I went up north and got it. And my card catalog's still up there. So I got to go up again in a couple weeks and then I'll bring that down and then everything will be here and I'll just be waiting for people to haul it out into a truck.
Yeah. Well, the woman I got mine from was impressed that I was able to stick it into I have a four-door Lexus.
Hmm.
And she was like, "There's no way this is going to fit in that car." And I was like, you want to watch me?"
You made it happen. Yeah.
And I probably could have fit a whole nother section in the car. And she's like, "Oh my God." And I was like, "Well, it comes apart into pieces. So,
Yeah.
it's not as bad as you think."
Right. Right. It's not a
So
single piece of furniture, at least. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, this was good. Thank you. And yeah, section
the,
2
pa
next week.
the palate cleanser we didn't know we needed. And for those watching to the bare end, chapter 7 through 11.
Chapter 7 through 11. Right. All right. Take care.
Take care.